This is Senior Sergeant Barry Gipp.
As you know, most of the people in this room are detectives, got a lot of experience. And when you're dealing with gangs, on large amount of gangs, or whether they're 5 or 6, there can be a high chance of confrontation. Now, we've had a large influx and high volume of crime in regards to Africans, ethnic gangs committing large amounts of armed robberies in and around the city and northwest. Basically, what we need is people who can deal with these people, and that's why we've started this North Bank operation.
Okay, on the line, the man in charge, Assistant Commissioner Steve Fontana. Good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Okay, increasing prevalence. How much is it increasing?
Look, Neil, over the last 12 months, particularly while I've been at the region, I've noticed a significant trend in, we've always had the robberies occur and street crime, particularly on Friday and Saturday nights, but across the region, we're getting hit pretty hard with street robberies, and the thing that's really concerning is the large number of youth involved in terms of the 5 to up to 10, up to 15 youth at times involved in single incidents, and it's quite a worrying trend. Normally you get 1 or 2 people that might be robbing, but when you're getting these large groups, it's of real concern. What
are they doing? How do they target people?
Well, they'll normally target people that are vulnerable, particularly in the cities. Like it's a safe place in the city, but in those fringe areas, the lanes, some of the isolated parks, they'll surround them, they'll ask for a phone or something like that, and usually victims in most occasions are under the influence of alcohol or some other substance, and they're quite vulnerable, and they can be quite violent with these people. The violence is actually often unnecessary, and it's sort of, from our point of view, at times used as a power type of for exercising their power over people.
Well, it's quite vicious, is it? What sort of things are done?
Well, look, sometimes they're armed with weapons, sticks or bottles and things, but a lot of times it's the fists and the feet, and it's more than one person getting involved, and it's quite unnecessary.
What are they doing it for, a buzz or something? Are they enjoying the violence?
We don't know. On some occasions we think they may be, or they might be just showing that, well, we're in charge here, and it's their way of exercising their power over others.
What age group are we talking about?
Look, the concerning thing is a lot of them are under 21, and a lot of the offenders we've charged are around the 15, 16, 17-year-old age group, and that's of real concern as well.
Now, the Senior Sergeant Gipp mentioned ethnic gangs. What ethnic groups are you talking about?
Look, we get large groups of with African descent, a background. They'd probably account for a large number of our robberies, particularly in the city, and other types of serious offences. But we also get groups of Asian background, Middle Eastern background, and obviously Caucasian. So there is a mix, but the concern is that particular groups are overrepresented in the amount of crime that's been committed.
And what are you saying, that the African and Asian groups are overrepresented?
I would say more so in terms of if you looked at the size of the population, the number of African youth involved is exceeding the general population, and it's a real worrying concern. And there are a whole range of issues that we're trying to work through with the community. A lot of these, and the issue is they're young, they're marginalised, they're disengaged from their community, and I think we've got a lot of work here to do. It's not a policing, we can't arrest our way out of this, as we've often said, but this is more of a larger, broader community type issue, and how we get these youth back engaged with the community.
Look, I applaud you for talking about it. There's no point in avoiding the issues, even though they're hard ones, but is race an issue in the attacks, or are they just targeting anybody and they're just hanging together because they're African mates?
Look, race isn't an issue in relation to it. We sort of, there's no particular, we've had a look at who the victims are. They've come from various backgrounds. I think I'd say there's a hardcore group of individuals that are sort of putting pressure, or peer group pressure, on some of the other groups that, when they get in the group. But, we don't know why they're committing it, but they're certainly disengaged from their own community and from the broader community, and that's a concern.
There's a relevance to this question. Are these Australian-born kids or not?
Look, a lot of them probably are of African descent, so the majority, I would suggest, are of Australian descent. And I'd say, look, these patterns of offending are concentrated in localised hubs around our region. So we've got the City of Melbourne, obviously, Brimbank, Moonee Valley, the City of Yarra. So they're moving around, certain areas of our region, and it's in those concentrated areas. And obviously, there's large populations of, people of African descent living in these particular areas. And so the issue we have is we do need to, sort of check large groups of youth because they are involved in a large amount of offending in the area. But then, they become hostile and alienated to police and the law because we've got to do a job there, and it's very difficult. But if you've got a high concentration of the crime in these areas, they'll often get quite upset with our activities.
Yeah, the reason I ask about them being Australian-born, often if they're Australian-born, there's a cultural clash with their parents. And even if they're not Australian-born, if they can be very young, this isn't just African, there's any migrant kid that can be that cultural clash, which the parents find frustrating because they find it more difficult to control the kids.
Look, this is a real issue for the community, and it's. I think we've gone through this in history with all the new and emerging communities. Exactly the same thing happens. So I sometimes wonder whether we've actually learnt. But certainly a lot of these youth are actually disengaged from their families and the broader African community and the wider Australian community, and that's the issue. And how do we get them back engaged? I'd suggest a lot of them aren't going to school. They've fallen out of the system, and this is a real issue that we've got to try and work through. Whilst we can do a law enforcement approach, there's some broader social issues that need to be addressed here, and the community needs help.
Of course, the police have been accused in the Flemington area in particular of targeting African kids simply because they're African.
Well, that's not right. We actually target the behaviour, and I know, and this is what I talked about, that alienation from police and the law. It's the fact is that we do have a large amount of crime being committed by youth groups, particularly of African descent in these areas. And I'm not saying it's just African youth, but they account for a large percentage of the serious assaults and robberies within certain areas. And so naturally, we will be checking these groups when we see them.
Are they pretty well organised? I mean, you talk about them moving around different areas. Are they that well organised?
Look, they follow the train lines and transport systems.
Yeah.
So, and as I said, these groups are pretty, they're loosely connected. So I'd say you've got one or two hardcore individuals, and they do hang around in numbers for their own protection. But then you've also got groups that actually offend in numbers, which is of concern.
Do they run under names, or just a group of kids? Or do they call themselves things?
Look, I don't know. Some may call them. I understand one or two may call themselves the names, but I haven't got those names in front of me. But a lot of them, when we're investigating these crimes, we're not told it's a particular gang or something like that. We're actually looking for the individuals involved. Okay,
so what do? You run things like Operation North Bank. What else?
Well, we've got North Bank, and you obviously saw, Seb saw Operation Gauntlet on the weekend, which was with the transit police. So you've got plainclothes members riding the trains, and when they get to certain transport hubs, they're met by uniformed police. The plainclothes members are identifying people on those trains that could be causing a problem or likely to cause a problem, and so we meet them and greet them when they arrive at the various railway stations. And it's basically aimed at trying to sort of early intervention to stop problem brewing later on in the evening, particularly when they're coming into the city.
And if you're coming into the city to, do what people do, which is go to nightclubs or go to theatres or things, what do you do? Should you be taking extra care or not?
Look, I think, a lot of the offences are committed in isolated areas, down laneways and things. And like when we were walking around the city on Friday, Saturday night, I know, we had the media there and they're waiting for action, and Seb was fortunate that he was there when an incident did occur. But generally, it's a very safe city. So it's about staying where the numbers are, and the issue, which you'll see, and Seb would have observed this, a lot of the young people come in, they get intoxicated. They're more likely to become a victim of crime or get involved in crime when they are intoxicated. So they might often wander into isolated locations, and these offenders are actually targeting people that are vulnerable.
Okay, so we've achieved a lot in cleaning up the city, but we seem to have a different problem here, don't we?
we do have a problem with, these groups. And as I said, it's not just all African groups. I want to say, they do represent a large volume, but there are other groups that come in as well. And so we're just targeting that behaviour and when we see large groups of youth in the city, we'll be watching them.
Thank you very much for your time.
No worries.